Good morning, Logic students. Welcome to Logic for May the 13th of 2020. This is our final Logic class for the year. Next Wednesday is our closing program, so we will not have class. This is the last Logic video you have to watch for this term. I wanted to take a moment and clean up a couple of things with housekeeping here. Number one, I have some assignments that it's actually Tuesday night right now. I'll be finishing grading tonight and tomorrow morning for your logic classes. Some of you have submitted some things I've not gotten back to you from our homework the last couple weeks. So I plan to have all of those things back to you tomorrow and have everything all caught up in terms of grading for this class. Once I do that, if you've submitted your homework, you'll have a pretty good idea of how you've done on Chapter 8 stuff. And then you can use your homework as a study guide for your Chapter 8 exam. Because that's what we're going to end this year with, is one more test, and that being on Chapter 8. The test is relatively simple. Throughout the first, 8.1, 3.4, 8.5, we've been discussing 7 rules for determining the validity of a syllogism. We've learned them. It's 4 quantitative, 3 qualitative rules that help us when we look at any syllogism to say, hey, was that argued correctly? Does the conclusion logically follow the major and the minor premise? That's the whole idea of validity. That whatever the major and the minor premise say, the conclusion can be drawn from that, and that conclusion is airtight. The only way that conclusion can be airtight, though, is if the syllogism follows all 7 of these rules. So I'm just going to briefly rehearse them, restate them, and summarize them for your benefit. That way you can use this video also to study for your last test. And I'll tell you I'll be on the test here in just a second. Rule number 1. There are only 3 terms in a syllogism. That is to say, you have a subject and predicate in each of the 2 premises, as well as the conclusion, for a total of 6 terms. But there are only 3 unique ones. If you end up with 4 different terms in the syllogism, it can't work. The syllogism only works if there are 3 unique terms, each of which are repeated twice. Okay, that's rule number 1. Rule number 2. The middle term cannot be in the conclusion. Okay. Along with undistributed, middle, I think, is the most complicated term to remember in the questions of validity. But the middle term, you'll recall, is the term that is repeated in the major and minor premise. If I gave you the syllogism, let's skip the Socrates one since we say that so often. If we just do this, some mice are rodents. All rodents are squirrels. Okay, there we have the major and the minor premise of a syllogism. I repeated the term rodents. Because it's repeated and it's in the major and the minor premise, it's a middle term. If rodents makes it out of the major and minor premise into my conclusion, that's sayonara for the syllogism. It cannot be valid. The middle term has to be in the major and minor premise. It cannot be in the conclusion also. Rule number 3. The middle term must be distributed at least once. Okay, what does distributed mean? Let's see if we can remind ourselves of that, because both rules 3 and 4 have to do with distribution of the terms. So you might recall that when a term in the predicate needs to be distributed, that it's important to look at the table that is on page 193. This is the best way I can tell you to tell if any kind of predicate is distributed. And what I mean by that is this. If you are looking at a predicate term in let's just say, an I proposition. The predicate in an I proposition is undistributed. Always, always. Can't be otherwise. Whereas if you're looking at an E or an O proposition, the predicate is always distributed. Okay, so that little table at the bottom of page 193, as you're studying for this test, I highly recommend that you commit that to memory. Okay, let me just read to you this little bit about distribution, though, as it pertains to the subject terms, because I think this is important. All right, lost my page here for a second. Let me find it. Where'd you go? Okay, as you may notice, this is on page 189. Both of these rules contain the word distributed, rules 3 and 4, and are concerned with the proper distribution of terms. Therefore, before you can grasp these rules, it is important that you understand what the word distributed means. A term in a syllogism is considered distributed if it refers to all the members of its class. That is the key phrase. If it refers to all the members of its class. When we talk about a term being distributed, if all of something is in your syllogism, if all mice are rodents, it applies to all of the class of mice. Therefore, mice are distributed. If we said no mice are rodents, then what we would be left with is, again, something that applies to the entire class of mice. None of them have rodentness in them. So the bottom line is, if the subject is completely covered by either all or no, then you have a distributed term. It's undistributed if it's some or some not. If I said some mice are rodents, which automatically implies that some are not, if I only say some, not all or none, it's an undistributed term. And this is why it's easy to tell for subjects, right? Subjects always have a quantifier. It's either all, none, or some. If it's one of the sums, the subject is not distributed. If it's one of the alls or the nones, the subject is distributed. Now, rule number 3 is the middle term must be distributed at least once. So once you look at your major and minor premise and figure out which term repeats, okay, if we did our all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, we know that men is the middle term. It's the repeating term. Okay, in either one of those premises, all men are mortal or Socrates is a man, is men or man distributed? The answer is yes, because the very first thing we say is all men. So it refers to all of them, and therefore it's distributed. So the middle term has to be distributed at least once. Rule 4, if a term is distributed in the conclusion, it must be distributed in the premises as well. Okay, this follows very easily. Look at your conclusion. If the subject has either all or none, or if it's the predicate of an E or an O proposition. If your conclusion is an E or an O proposition, look at your predicate. It will be distributed. It has to be. Just take my word for it. You don't have to understand how. If it's an E or an O proposition, the predicate is distributed. So look at your conclusion. If it's an E or an O, you have a distributed predicate. Look back at the major and minor premise. Was that term distributed somewhere in the major and minor premise? If it was, rule 4 has been met. If it wasn't, rule 4 has been broken. Rule 5. These get easier. No conclusion can follow two negative premises. That is to say, if the major and minor premise are two E's, two O's, or some combination of E and O, the conclusion isn't valid. Can't happen. Can't have a conclusion. Rule 6, if the premises are positive, the conclusion must be positive. Very simple. You can't say all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, none of Socrates is mortal. Doesn't make any sense. If your premises are positive, conclusion must be positive. If either premise is negative, rule 7, the conclusion must be negative. No ifs, ands, or buts. If you have either an E or an O as one of your major or your minor premises, conclusion must be negative, an E or an O also. Those are the 7 rules of validity. So here's what your test looks like. I'm going to give you 10 syllogisms, kind of like you did for homework last week, but it'll only be 10. I'll give you 10 syllogisms. We'll give you the option to say, I will write the rules at the top of the page or the bottom. I don't know. It'll be somewhere on the page. So you'll have the rules there as a reference. And you'll have to tell me if the syllogism breaks one of the rules or if it's valid. If it breaks one of the rules, you got to tell me which of the rules it breaks. I will let you know if it breaks more than one, and you'll have to tell me which ones it breaks if it's more than one. So that is what we're left with. Please make sure you get to me any homework that you've not turned in yet. I need to have that so that I can give you your final grades. Please make sure you turn this test back into me by next Wednesday. I'm going to actually put it officially as due tomorrow, that is Thursday. So you can take it tomorrow, you can take it Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. I don't care when you take it, but it needs to be back to me by next Wednesday in order to be on time. And now you know it's on it. You know it's going to cover the 7 rules. You know it'll be 10 syllogisms. So hopefully that'll go well. If you have any questions, drop me an email, send me a message on the Google Classroom, whatever you need to do. And I will talk to you all soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.